there's even more movement now with Senator Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader from Kentucky, trying to get included in this new farm bill, the 2008 Farm Bill, the Hemp Farming Act of 2018. And this would be a really important piece of legislation because it would remove industrial hemp from the Controlled Substances Act entirely, which should, in theory, eliminate the question of, under federal law, whether you can sell industrial hemp products from state to state without violating the Controlled Substances Act. You're still going to have to deal with those FDA prohibitions because the Hemp Farming Act would not amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So while hemp-derived CBD oil from Kentucky might be able to be sold in Ohio under the Controlled Substances Act, you still run into the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act prohibitions as it relates to that sale. And it arguably would not preempt state laws regarding CBD or the definition of marijuana. Correct, which is why up until 2014, industrial hemp was grown from another country, and then that oil was then imported to the United States, or you could buy hemp paper grown in Holland, right? And then it would be imported here to the United States, but you were not permitted to grow hemp, process it into paper here in the United States until very recently. And so now we are inching towards this new federal conflict scenario that is the reverse of cannabis policy generally, right? Where typically you had really lax state laws and very strict federal law. But if the feds legalize industrial hemp, you will have lax hemp laws at the federal level, but until the states follow suit and legalize industrial hemp at their level, you'll have lax federal laws and strict state hemp laws. There's already been a case of one prosecution here in Ohio that's still currently pending where a guy has been charged with felonies for possessing hemp-derived CBD oil. And you'll see, I pulled this off of the internet this morning when I was finalizing my presentation, and this is just an ad that was on some website, and you'll notice in the second line it says legal in all 50 states. I'm not entirely sure that's true because it depends on where that CBD is derived from. And I will bet dollars to donuts that 90% of the CBD oil that's on the market today is not derived from the mature stalk of the cannabis plant, which is, in my mind, the only way that it can be sold across state lines without running afoul of criminal definitions of marijuana. And then even then, I wonder whether it's legal in 50 states if the FDA's already told you can't sell it as a dietary supplement. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of risk in being involved in the CBD market. And something that we have not seen yet, but I'm telling you it's coming, are consumer protection cases involving labeling and deceptive advertising of CBD products. If I'm a consumer, I go and buy this product, and I get arrested. Why can't I file a class action lawsuit against this manufacturer for telling me it's legal in all 50 states, and I've bought a product that's now been seized from me? So I'm out at least the cost to buy the product, and I'm one of, 50,000 people that bought pursuant to this advertisement. So if you're advising these companies, make sure you're having very frank discussions with them about how they're marketing and advertising hemp-derived CBD. Products. Not intended to cure, treat, diagnose, yeah. I don't think consistent with FDA rules because the active ingredient is still CBD. So the product is still in violation of FDA rules because it contains CBD. Right, because the 0.3% is the THC content, not the CBD content. So that's the issue. So, you know, we're, again, talking about these conflicting signals we're getting from the federal government, right? The federal government is going to pass a statute that says industrial hemp is totally illegal, but they're not amending the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which says, but you can't sell it anywhere, right? So what I'm hoping we avoid is some type of scenario where it's like bath salts, right? Where CBD oil is being sold as something, you know, you use as a topical or you use in a way that's not meant to be consumed, and everybody slaps these warnings on it, you know, not for human consumption, but everybody knows that's why you're buying the product in the first place. You know, that's a very dangerous area to be in. And it goes back to some of the other uncertainty. Yes? Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with it only in that I saw the news article when the folks announced it, and I think it was on cleveland.com. Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on exactly what they're doing at that facility. Again, if you're getting shipped in mature stalks and the fibers from the stalks, I think they might be okay. This is not legal advice. They might be okay. But it really depends on exactly what they're doing, what they're processing. If they're growing hemp at that facility, that's a little bit of a problem, I think. But again, it really depends on exactly what their processes are going to be there. Is that helpful? Okay. I'm going to touch on some other, we're actually doing pretty good on time, some other general things that we're seeing when we work with our clients that I think are pretty specific to the cannabis space. We talked about banking, we talked about the awful tax treatment. Let's talk about real estate. One thing I did not anticipate is how hard it would be to get title insurance when cannabis companies are buying real estate. There are basically 4 big national title insurance underwriters in the country, and you have these smaller specialty underwriters. And the 4 big underwriters have said, we don't want anything to do with the cannabis industry, whether it's adult use or medical purpose only. The reason being, their boards are somewhat concerned that if the feds crack down on this industry, not only are they going to arrest the people buying the property, they're going to go all the way up the chain and they're going to come into their boardroom and arrest their board members for aiding and abetting the operation of an illegal drug trafficking operation. There's some question as to how real that risk is, but the practical effect is that if you have a cannabis client that's buying a policy and they want to use First American as the underwriter, and they get a whiff that this is a cannabis-related purchase, that title company is not going to be able to issue the title policy. So you have to go to these small title insurance companies, most of whom are out west, and your fees are going to be a lot higher. The other thing we've seen, interestingly enough, are deed restrictions. And you see some of these like from way back in the 20s and 30s with alcohol, where there will be a deed restriction from the days of alcohol prohibition that says you can't use this business for anything related to, production, sale, etc. of alcohol. There are deed restrictions that are out there that deal with either marijuana specifically or engaging in any type of distribution, sale of illegal controlled substances. And so if you have a cannabis client that has an agreement to purchase a piece of real estate, make sure you look at the deed and find out whether there's a deed restriction in there. Because if you've applied for one of these licenses and you've spent $5,000 a month for 6 or 7 months waiting for the state to award you a license and you find out you've got it, and boy, are you excited, and you go to buy the property and close on the transaction, and then you say, wait a minute, I can't use this property, and I can't transfer my location to anywhere else, so what do? The due diligence on these real estate purchases is very important, especially where a lot of your clients are going to be crunched for time and they're going to be putting in offers without telling you, sight unseen, to either lease a piece of property or buy it, and you don't want these deed restrictions to crop up there at the last minute. Local zoning and opposition from local city councils is something that we expected to run into, and we did in some locations. And we found that the most successful approach is to meet the opposition kind of where they are. And you and your clients may be perfectly convinced that cannabis policy is in terrible shape and that drug reform is sorely needed and that the medical marijuana control program is a great thing. But they may have folks that live in their ward that aren't so sure. So take the time to go out and meet the people in the neighborhood where your client wants to operate. We went door to door and met with folks up and down the street and answered whatever questions they would have. We met with local city council folks, with mayor's offices, months in advance of the time when we were actually going to ask for their approval. I mean, the due diligence on local zoning and navigating political waters is really important, especially because if you're looking for a specific policy change, maybe your client wants to locate in an area where there's a current moratorium, or maybe there's at least a long conditional use approval process that you're going to need to go through. It's probably a 6-month process to get that approval. City council meets once a month, and if you start meeting with them in May, there's going to be an August recess. So you lose that month during the summer. You're going to have to go to planning commission meetings, and your proposed ordinance is going to get referred to a committee for another 4 weeks before it goes back to city council. So start as early as you possibly can if your client has an eye on a piece of real estate, and make sure that the local government, the local officials are comfortable not only with marijuana in general, but with your client. They will look at your client with a lot of suspicion, because there are, unfortunately, a lot of charlatans in this space. And no pun intended, but we need to weed them out a little bit. And part of that starts at the local level, because the easiest way to find out who's the legitimate operator is to find out who can navigate those personalities, who can stand up to that exacting examination, both privately with folks in the neighborhood, but also when you're standing up in front of council and you're asked a question about your company. You can tell when people start trying to skirt answers. So it's really important to start that process as early as you can. And the other thing that we're seeing is landlords and sellers of real estate that know they got your client by the you-know-what because they can't move their location and they want to get that license, and it just so happens they want a little bit more money than they told you at the first, when you signed that lease agreement or then when you signed that purchase contract. So be prepared to deal with that and have conversations with your client. Is the lemon worth the squeeze to fight this person, or is it worth giving in? And how does that position you if someone asks for a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk? So you give in this time. What happens in 2 more weeks when you need to extend that option again? Are they going to want even more at that point? So make sure that when you're drafting your lease options or your purchase options, you build in contingencies for your client so that you can exercise a purchase option, but still subject to the contingency of winning that license. So that you can then tell that seller, I don't need to pay you an extra 10 grand. I've exercised my option and I have the right to back out if I don't win my license, and there's nothing you can do about it. And also build in extensions for those options, because as we've seen here in Ohio, there are unforeseen delays in license issuances from the state. If you would have told me, when we applied almost a year ago for processors, that we still would not have all 40 processing licenses awarded, I would have told you you're crazy. But I'm going to be thrilled if we get all 40 processor licenses awarded by the end of the year. So make sure your clients, excuse me, have the option to extend their right to lock down real estate.